listening to the NFL Draft Bible Podcast Network, part of Sports Illustrated, giving you daily NFL Draft, Dynasty, and Devy Fantasy Football podcasts.
Class is in session. Welcome into the draft seminar presented by Sports Illustrated's NFL Draft Bible Podcast Network. I'm your host, Matt Hicks, the FF Educator, joined as always by John Lobb, the Gridiron Scholar. And we're breaking down Kyle Trask here on this episode. And John, Kyle Trask for me is one of the most fascinating players in this year's draft because over the last 6 months, it seems like his fantasy value for most folks has shot up and down. But for me, John, he actually hasn't moved anywhere. And we're going to get a little bit more into that here as we get into the episode. But I'm sure you're excited to talk about Kyle Trask as well.
I am, Matt. And what a difference a year makes. If you think about last year, this time, there were Devy experts and NFL draft scouts who were touting Kyle Trask as a possible first rounder. I had seen some people I respect had him as a number 1 or 2 prospect entering the season. Right now, he has fallen precipitously since his amazing start to the 2020 season. And Matt, we really don't even hear about Kyle Trask from the national media. So let's take a look at him and how did we arrive at this spot? In high school, he sat behind Derek King. He really did not even play much in high school. Well, for good reason. Derek King is a great player, went to University of Houston, transferred to the University of Miami. The young man believed in himself and he enrolled at the University of Florida. He took a redshirt season right away and he waited patiently. At the beginning of the 2019 season, he was on the bench of the Felipe Franks. He only got his opportunity when Frank suffered a season-ending injury. And Kyle Trask became one of the best college fantasy football quarterbacks the last 2 months of the year. Matt, he was spectacular. He completed 237 of 354 passes, which are 2/3 for 2,941 yards and 25 touchdowns. He was named third team All-SEC. Think about it. He was behind Joe Burrow and Tua Tagovailoa. He was the returning starter. And you and I had broke him down in our Devy seminar over last summer. So the year kicked off in 2020. Matt, his numbers are silly here. 416 yards, 6 touchdowns, 268, 4, 312, 4, 345, 4, 474, 4, 356, and 6. He began the season as hot as any player in college football. When the curtain closed, he had completed 301 passes of 437 attempts for 4,283 yards and 43 touchdowns. He was second team All-American and second team All-SEC behind our man Mac Jones. I remember the great Steve Spurrier teams of the 90s. He broke Danny Werfel's 24-year-old record with 39 touchdowns at Florida. He set 2 key single-season passing marks, yards and touchdowns. He averaged 356.9 yards per game. He eclipsed 400 yards passing in 5 games. But Matt, we hardly hear about Kyle Trask right now in the national media. What does your film study say about Kyle Trask, my friend?
Yeah, John, it's because when you look at the film, it's a little less exciting than necessarily the stats come out to. And a huge part of that is Dan Mullen, the offensive or now the head coach, also the offensive coordinator at Florida, is known for not only being a wizard when it comes to working with quarterbacks, but he understands how to call plays to hide their deficiencies. Now, when it comes to Kyle Trask, you're going to see right off the bat, the thing that does jump out is he does have good arm strength. And I have him at an 87 for arm strength. That's a good score for me, but I don't want to confuse it with some of the other arms that you're going to see in this year's draft. It's good, John. It's not elite, but he can push that ball 45, 50, 55 yards downfield at times with relative ease. And he does have a good zip on his ball in the short field. So he understands kind of how to change that arm strength in the short field versus the deep third of the field. Now his accuracy, John, that's one of the things that really gets hidden this season at Florida, right? But if you look a little bit past the highlights, or even if you're looking at the highlights, right, you're going to see Kyle Pitts really extending for a ball. You're going to see Kadarius Toney reacting to off-thrown balls. So the consistency in his accuracy, John, is really not there, despite at times him putting really nice touch on the ball. At times he leads his receivers really nicely, but he also short arms a lot of balls. He overthrows wide receivers consistently. You see him miss high a lot on his tape, and he's especially inconsistent there over the middle of the field, which is very risky, John, when it comes to decision making, right? So we're going to talk about his mental processing here as well. He tosses the ball up for grabs a little bit too often for me. I see him get locked into his first read a lot, especially if you go back to last season. He did improve in his mental processing in 2020. That's one of the things that I did like a lot, from this season. But again, it's still inconsistent, despite the fact that he had a play caller really helping him out with that. And John, the mechanics for me, it's not there. He leaves his body open too often when he throws. That was consistent in 19 and 20 tape. His feet are unsettled. So although he moves well in the pocket, he doesn't always settle those feet down when it comes to actually throwing the ball, which is a really consistent problem in his 2020 tape. And I also think, John, one of the big things that's holding him back, he's a pocket passer with a slow release. He's got a hitch at the bottom of his throw, and it creates a slower release than necessary, and that's just not going to work in today's game. So he's got to tie those things up. 87 in arm strength, 80 in accuracy, and 80 in mental processing, 78 in mechanics, John. My overall fantasy football projection, taxi squad stash. We're going to see him go late day 2, early day 3, despite that initial round 1 hype that you were referring to, and he's going to be a backup. But he's worth stashing on your taxi squad because you never know with quarterbacks in the NFL. But John, why don't we go ahead and flip on the tape here and put a little visual to what I've been describing.
Let's look at this Gator throw.
All right. As always, provided by Brandon Lejeune, Devy Deep Dive on YouTube and Twitter. And you can see off the bat here, this is a good example of anticipation. He places that ball well along the sidelines. And John, I actually think he's a rare instance of a passer that's a little bit more comfortable throwing to the sidelines than he necessarily is, throwing over the middle of the field.
Yeah, I kind of concur with you. And we just saw Kadarius Toney save him with a high pass. And look at Kyle Pitts dig that ball out low. I mean, you mentioned it, the context. Dan Mullen's offense, Kadarius Toney, Kyle Pitts, Travion Grimes. He had some great teammates to throw the ball to.
And as we're kind of watching these plays progress here, I want you to see both against Georgia, and it's really consistent throughout his tape. It looks like he has a pretty tight release, but with that being said, it's a slow release, and it doesn't show up as much, playing in the SEC. But John, it's going to show up playing at the next level. One thing that we're seeing here on the last couple plays of this Kyle Trask tape is one thing we didn't talk a ton about, John, and that's his mobility. He had enough mobility to run the QB draw, to run some, QB power, some very limited runs, at the college level. That mobility is not going to translate to the next level. He's 6'5", so he can do that QB sneak fall forward thing, but that's about all you're going to get out of him. So, John, with all that said, what do the production metrics look like for what you're usually looking for here in your NFL quarterbacks?
The first thing you had mentioned his running, we saw some highlights. That is not the norm. he's a pocket passer. And I gave him a C on his Skype ability score. He only has 51 career rushing yards. And so we basically saw about a quarter of his career rushing yards on those two highlights. It's interesting because my model, he hits 4 of my 5 benchmarks: passing efficiency, yards per attempt, touchdown to interception ratio, and completion percentage. But Matt, this is a young man. You have to watch the film and place him in context. He's 6'5", 240-pound red shirt senior. He was on campus for 5 years. He has an incredible head coach / coordinator in Dan Mullins. And we had mentioned the talent at Florida this year. You basically have a guaranteed top 10 pick. You have probably a first, if not second round wide receiver. And Trayvon Grimes will probably get picked in the 6th round, 5th or 6th round. So he had tremendous teammates and coaching scheme to pop up those numbers. I have a 3rd round grade. I would be surprised if he gets picked in the 2nd round. I agree with your analysis. He's a quarterback stash if he has an opportunity in the NFL. I respect the young man for his fortitude and rising to the heights as he has. It's a great narrative, a great story of hard work, but he's got a long journey ahead in the NFL.
All right, there you have it. Kyle Trask, the quarterback out of Florida. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Draft Seminar presented by Sports Illustrated's NFL Draft Bible Podcast Network. If you enjoyed this episode and have not already, please give it a like. If you're watching the video, please subscribe to